Hey guys, it's me, Miss Norris. And today I'd like to share a fun read aloud with you of the story Two of Everything. The story Two of Everything is a Chinese folktale that is being retold and illustrated by Lily Toy Hong, and this version was written in 1993. If you're ready to hear the story Two of Everything, then I'm ready to share it with you. Here we go. Two of Everything. And you'll see a little couple on the front cover of the story. This is a Chinese folktale. This is supposed to be the Chinese countryside, all the rolling hills. Once, long ago, in a humble little hut, lived Mr. Haktak and his wife, Mrs. Haktak. They were old and very poor. What little they ate came from their tiny garden. This is Mr. and Mrs. Haktak, and they don't have a lot of money, and whatever they eat comes from their little garden, which they also looks like they share with the birds. And there's their little hut. In a lucky year, when the harvest was plentiful, Mr. Haktak had a little extra to take to the village. There he traded turnips, potatoes, and other vegetables for clothing, lamp oil, and fresh seeds. So when they were able to grow more than enough for them, they were able to take some of it into town and sell it. And when they didn't have enough, then there was things that are important, like oil for your lamps and seeds to make new plants and even clothing that the Haktaks could not afford. One spring morning, when Mr. Haktak was digging in his garden, his shovel struck something hard. Puzzled, he dug deeper into the dark ground until he came upon an ancient pot made of brass. "How odd," said Mr. Haktak to himself, "to think that I have been digging here all these years and never came upon this pot before. I will take it home. Maybe Mrs. Haktak can find some use for it." So Mr. Haktak is gardening, and he hits something hard, and it turns out to be an ancient brass pot. And he says, I've been digging in the same place for a really long time. I'm really surprised I've never dug this up before. Oh well, I'm going to take this to Mrs. Haktak and see if she knows what to do with it. The pot was big and heavy for old Mr. Haktak. As he stumbled along, his purse, which contained his last 5 gold coins, fell to the ground. He tossed it into the pot for safekeeping and staggered home. His wife greeted him at the door. "Dear husband, what a strange pot." Mr. Haktak explained how he found the pot. "Ah, I wonder what we can do with it," said Mrs. Haktak. "It looks too large to cook in and too small to bathe in." So Mr. Haktak was having a hard time getting this pot home, and he dropped his purse, his coin purse, that had his last 5 gold coins in it. So he put it in the pot so he could carry both of them together. And his wife says, "Oh, what an interesting pot. It's too big for cooking, but it's not really big enough for us to get in there and take a bath. Well, we'll figure it out." That's a good attitude. We'll figure it out. As Mrs. Haktak leaned over to peer into the pot, her hairpin, the only one she owned, fell in. She felt around in the pot, and suddenly her eyes grew round with surprise. "Look," she shouted, "I've pulled out 2 hairpins, exactly alike, and 2 purses too." Sure enough, the purses were identical, and so were the hairpins. Inside each purse, there were 5 gold coins. So now they have double. They had 5, now they have 10. And Mrs. Haktak now has 2 hairpins instead of just 1. And you can see that Mr. Haktak is very confused. Magic. Mr. Haktak was so excited he jumped up and down. Let's put my winter coat inside the pot. If we are lucky again, the pot will make 2 coats. Then we will both stay warm. So into the pot went 1 coat, and out came 2 coats. They began to search the house and quickly put more things into the magical pot. Oh, if only we had some meat, wished Mr. Haktak, or fresh fruit, or 1 delicious sweet cake. So, before this magic pot, Mr. and Mrs. Haktak had to take turns wearing the jacket to stay warm. And now they have 2. And now they're thinking about what other things they might be able to put into that pot. But they really kind of want some food, some meat, some vegetables, a cake. They're looking and looking. Do you know what to do? What would you do if you had a magic pot that made 2 of everything? Mrs. Haktak smiled. I know how we can get anything we want, she said. She put their 10 coins into 1 purse, then threw it into the pot. She pulled out 2 purses with 10 coins in each. So 10 and 10 is 20. What a clever wife I have, cried Mr. Haktak. Each time we do this, we will have twice as much money as before. The Haktaks worked late into the night, filling and emptying the pot until the floor was covered with coins. So they keep putting their coins in there and doubling it, and now you can see that they're sleeping with all their coins all around them. Is that what you would have done? Morning came, and off Mr. Haktak went with a long list of things to buy in the village. Instead of vegetables, his basket was full of gold coins. Mrs. Haktak finished all of her chores and sat down to enjoy a cup of tea. She sipped her tea and admired the brass pot. Then, with a grateful heart, she knelt and embraced it. Dear pot, I do not know where you came from, but you are my best friend. She stooped over the pot to look inside. So she's giving the pot a hug because this pot has just helped make her and Mr. Haktak's life a lot easier. And now she's looking inside the pot. At that very moment, Mr. Haktak returned. His arms were so full of packages that he had to kick the door open. Bang! Mrs. Haktak was so startled that she lost her balance and fell head first into the pot. Dun, dun, dun! Mr. Haktak ran over and grabbed his wife's legs. He pulled and tugged until she slid out onto the floor. But when he looked into the pot again, he gasped. 2 more legs were sticking straight out of it. Naturally, he took hold of the ankles and pulled. Out came a second person. She looked exactly like his wife. So now we've pulled out Mrs. Haktak, but we have another Mrs. Haktak. The new Mrs. Haktak sat silently on the floor looking lost. But the first Mrs. Haktak cried, I am your one and only wife. Put that woman back into that pot right now. Mr. Haktak yelled, No! If I put her back, we will not have 2 women but 3. 1 wife is enough for me. He backed away from his angry wife and tripped and fell head first into the pot himself. So his wife was mad. She did not want another lady being Mr. Haktak's wife. And as he was trying to get away, he fell into the pot. Both Mrs. Haktaks rushed to rescue him. Each grasped an ankle, and together they pulled him out. There were 2 more legs in the pot, so they pulled out the other Mr. Haktak too. So now we have 2 Mrs. Haktaks and 2 Mr. Haktaks. What are they going to do? Just what use does one Mr. Haktak have for another? Mr. Haktak cried angrily. This pot is not as wonderful as we thought it to be. Now even our troubles are beginning to double. But his wife had been thinking while he was yelling. Calm down, she said. It is good that the other Mrs. Haktak has her own Mr. Haktak. Perhaps we will become best friends. After all, we are so alike. He will be like a brother to you, and she will be like a sister to me. With our pot, we can make 2 of everything, so there will be plenty to go around. So Mr. Haktak is mad. The new Mr. and Mrs. Haktak are freaking out. It's a little loud. And Mrs. Haktak has said, hey, they're probably going to become our best friends. They're so much like us. And with our magic pot, there's enough of everything. So let's just have some best friends. And that is what they did. The Haktaks built 2 fine new homes. Each house had identical teapots, rice bowls, silk embroideries, and bamboo furniture. From the outside, the houses looked exactly alike. But there was one difference. Hidden in one house was a big brass pot. Of course, the Haktaks were always very careful not to fall into it again. So we have Mr. and Mrs. Haktak and Mr. and Mrs. Haktak. And one of these houses has a brass pot in it. The new Haktaks and the old Haktaks did become friends. The neighbors thought that the Haktaks had grown so rich that they decided to have 2 of everything, even themselves. So the Haktaks and the Haktaks did become besties, and everyone in town whispered about how they'd become so rich that they even bought 2 of themselves. The end. Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed the story 2 of everything, please hit that thumbs up button at the bottom of the page. If you're already a subscriber, thank you so much for your support. If you're not a subscriber yet, click that subscribe button down at the bottom of the page, and don't forget to click the bell so that you're notified when there's new content. I hope to see you all again real soon. Bye-bye.